Generally, it kind of comes back to what we talked about, dough temperature and following the directions on the bag. If it's too cold, many times they're going to ball up. If you overmix the dough and you make it really tough, it's going to cause those. So those are the most common things. When you're having that problem, just sort of go back to the basics, which were presented in this video. Make sure that you're mixing for the proper amount of time and the proper speed, and that you've got the weighing the water so that you have the correct hydration and that you're doing that dough temp. In Melissa, in our manual, we even have one a little simpler than the calculation that we had. And in fact, on the back of almost every Dawn bag of cake donut mix, there is a dough temperature chart that will tell you if the room temperature is 70, if the mix temperature is 65 or 85, what temperature does my water need to be? So it's very simple and it's on there. Those things will really help go a long way to correcting that.
So for frying donuts, you want to use a solid fryer fat rather than a liquid. You're going to get a much nicer product out of a donut. There's lots of opinions as to which one, but really the most important thing is going to be that solid fryer fat.
It is. And Melissa, there's so many varieties of them out there today. It is really come down to personal preference. There are some people that want it to be all animal and or not all vegetable and not have any animal in it. But there are some folks today that feel that the animal vegetable blends have a better taste. It may smoke less. Some people want all palm for sustainability, for clean label and those type of things. And it works and it fries very well. It may smoke a little bit more sometimes than some of the donuts. So they all have unique differences and they're sort of designed for some purposes. And we do have a flyer at Dawn Foods, which would be available off of our website or from a Dawn Foods rep, which details the various types of frying fats that we sell and what some of their unique characteristics are.
I do have one add to that. One thing that's really kind of unique about donuts as to other things that go through a fryer is that you actually need to have seasoned fryer fat as well. So if you start with a brand new fryer, right, and fill it full of new fryer fat, you're going to need to save a little bit of your old one and pop it in, which is the complete opposite to liquid fryer oil, where if you did that, we'd be horrified. So it's a kind of little quirky thing when using the solid fryer fat, but just be aware of that, that if you haven't seasoned it at all and it's brand new, your first couple of batches may not come out the way you expect. So just know that going in.
And I think a follow-up to that, Melissa, is to encourage everyone to filter that fat. And people will ask us how often it needs to be how often it needs to be filtered. And it really depends on the volume of donuts that you're making. Weekly at a very minimum. If you don't have an automatic fryer filter system, you can find those at a lot of places. Dawn Foods also can help you with that. But it's so important, especially with the price of frying fat today. You want to get as much life out of your fat as you can. B, you want that to be a good quality fat, not have any residue, not have any bitter aftertaste, and those can all be virtually eliminated by filtering it, and your frying fat will last a long time when you filter it.
I would like to add to that as well. It's not just what kind of fat, it's also how fresh is your fat. And oxidation is a huge deal in shelf life extension. If your fat is already partially oxidized while you fry the donut, you aren't going to have a very long shelf life. In terms of the, free radicals in the oils oxidizing faster during shelf life and reacting with your frosting and everything in your donut. Okay, so it's so important, especially if you are baking or frying for cake donuts that last for more than 7 days. You need to change your oil out more frequently. I would advise more like every day or every 2 days. So that's just my suggestion on quality fat, using quality fat.
Time and temperature. We're going to keep saying the same thing over and over again. It's time and temperature.
At the wrong temperature, you're going to absorb more fat. At lower temperature, if it doesn't create a crisp out outside structure is just going to keep absorbing the fat. So if you don't get the right temperature, like Melissa said, then you're going to absorb more fat.
That's right. And so key in the proof box that you've got that donut proofed, you've aged it right, and it's proofed, and that you touch it to where you don't have that spring back. And you notice in the video, we said to let them air dry for 4 or 5 minutes. Much of that helps to get that donut to coat like that. If your proof box was a little bit wet, that'll let that dry off. And if the donut is damp when you put it in the fryer, it'll have a tendency to blister, and that will always soak a little bit more grease.
So when we bake donuts rather than fry them, you would use a completely different mix. So the donut mixes that Dawn creates are formulated specifically for grease absorption. They're not going to work the same in an oven. So if you wanted to use a baked donut, you're going to use more of a cake technique. And if you're going to do that, you're going to use a cake mix, right? So you're going to buy those molds. I would suggest if you're a Dawn customer using a cream cake mix, high ratio cakes, meaning that there's more sugar than flour by weight, right, are going to be a little too light. So you're going to want something with a little more tooth to it. So a cream cake mix, if you're working scratch, think more pound cake, right? But you're going to go ahead and hit that with pan spray, pipe it into your molds, and call it a day. I would not suggest subbing with a donut mix, again, because they're specifically formulated to be fried, and they're not going to work the same.
I smile because the goal many times for that is to have a low-fat donut, but without the fat, you don't really have a donut. So if we bake it with a cream cake or another mix, we're baking it with a mix that already has more fat included into the mix itself. So you're picking up the fat, it's just mixed in it rather than picked up in the fryer. So to get a certain mouthfeel, there is going to be a certain amount of fat that is in that mix. And so you really have a little bit of a trade-off there. Now you think about a kolache is almost a baked donut, because it's a very lean sweet dough, meaning it has a lower percentage of fat and sugar in it than some sweet doughs or a brioche or that type of thing. So you have to be careful what you say and why you say it, or what product that you want to develop and what you want to do with it and what your reasoning is. Because sometimes what you think might cause it to be a low-fat donut is not going to give you what you really want.
Yes. So when you're using that fresh cake donut yeast, you're going to put it on top. If those of you that have scratch background like I do, you're going to look at that and say, that's a German method. And it is, you're right. And it also works really beautifully for donuts. So yeah, right on top. I'm going to throw that over to Randy, but that also has to do with where you are in the world, right? The United States is really, really unique in that we like our cake donuts and our yeast raised donuts. There's other parts of the world where cake donuts don't exist. It's either yeast raised or something like a mochi base. So this is very specific to the United States market and Canada. And with that, I'll throw it over to Randy.
Yeah, the cake donut is pretty much just that. It's much more of a cake. Consistency and texture. When you break it open, when you eat it, it looks very close to a cake. And it's moist. It's going to have a longer shelf life. It's going to be more dense. A yeast raised donut is, again, exactly that. It's a dough made with yeast, and the goal is to get a nice rise out of it so that you have a tender, fluffy donut that is much more of a light bread texture. So they're really quite different. There has been a resurgence in the United States over the last few years in cake donuts. We're seeing much more popularity. I think a lot of that's driven by flavors, donut toppings, some of the variety that are done to that, and also the fact that it is seemingly easier to sometimes make cake donuts, quote unquote, in the field, like on in a fair environment, in a stadium, something like that, because you can use some of the automated machinery, some of the donut robots and some of those things, and you're just mixing batter for 2 minutes, letting it set for 10 minutes or so, putting it in a hopper, and then it can immediately be run. Where the process of making the yeast raised donut, it takes you 12 to 15 minutes to mix the dough, then it has to set 30 to 45 minutes, and it has to set another 15 minutes. Then you have to cut it. So the whole procedure of making a yeast raised donut is about 3 times as much time to make that as it is in a cake donut.
So I really love yeast raised donut. If you ask me what's my special preference, I would always reach for the yeast raised donuts just because my taste prefers that fluffy heaven, right?
Yes.
But I'm not so sure about the grocery side of things. Perhaps Dr. Jayne can share some light on what she sees in terms of, what do we sell more of? Do we sell more of the yeast raised donuts or cake donuts? And what is the difference there, Dr. Jayne?
So certainly on the packaged donut side, we're almost exclusively going to be looking at cake style donuts, especially because they can kind of hold some of those chocolate enrobings a little bit better and survive that in packaging. When you start to look at it from a retail perspective, like actual cases of donuts, it's a little bit more of a mixture. That's where you start to see more yeast donuts coming into play. Again, with some variety thrown in with those cake donuts, especially for the flavors and the toppings that come with them. So it just depends on which part of the retail side you're looking at, packaged or case.
I might add to that part of that has to do with, as you both know, the shelf life of each of these, right? We can get an extended shelf life out of a cake donut that you just can't get out of a yeast raised. And, when I think about those, there's, multiple levels of that, right? And so, Dawn offers all those levels, but essentially you can do with the cake donuts, you could do a 12 to 24, you could do a 24 to 36. I mean, you can get 1 to 3 days, 12 to 15 days, you can get up to 27 days on a cake donut, where a yeast raise, you're kind of topping out at 48 hours. So when we think about those two things in the retail space, to your point, that's a big difference. That's a big difference.
That's correct.
Yeah. And I mean, shelf life differs depending on whether you're looking at case or packaged, because obviously with the packaged donut, you have a little bit more gas and moisture barrier control. And so really the issue that you start looking at is one of mold growth over time. When you're looking at case donuts, you're looking at something shelf life being driven more by moisture loss as opposed to something like a mold growth. So it's different shelf life strategies depending on which category you're looking at as a result. There are 2 different things to consider with a packaged donut for 12 to 18 months shelf life. Very ambitious. The first is to make sure you're selecting the correct packaging. And you need to think about not only what the moisture barrier properties are, but you also need to think about what the gas barrier properties are, because you don't want moisture building up in the package, but you also don't want too much escaping and causing the product to dry out. And from a gas barrier perspective, you need to be thinking about rancidity issues. So with fat, over time, you're going to run that risk of oxidation leading towards rancidity. So those are 2 things to think about from a packaging perspective. When you start to look at it from a microbial perspective, for a 12 to 18 month shelf life, you are absolutely looking at the need to add some kind of preservative. That will vary depending on whether these are enrobed or coated versus not enrobed or coated. The risk is more at the surface of the donut. And certainly when you're talking about like a chocolate enrobed donut, it's going to occur at that interface between the coating and the donut surface. So you'll need some kind of preservative in both the donut itself, as well as in that coating material to stop that mold growth at the interface. Also think about water activity of the donut as well, because that will be key in mitigating mold growth as well. And then combine that with a preservative. That's probably what you're looking at if you're trying to achieve 12 to 18 months of shelf life.
And to add to that, perhaps this question came from a scenario of maybe like a backpacking kind of, military racial kind of background, which is really hard to formulate and develop for, because you really need to get the water activity of such a system down below 0.8, right? So when you get that low, you really have zero like water left. So you have to replace that with a lot of fat and a lot of sugar. So you're talking about a system that has a lot of fat and a lot of sugar, but really it can last 18 months, you know? So,
yeah.
And so you need to think about, a low water activity system, anything that can get you there. And also not to forget, chelating agents that will prevent oxidation of the fats and of the glaze. Yeah. So a lot of things to think about that cannot be answered here. And perhaps, my suggestion is to reach out to Dr. Jayne Bock or the team at Dawn if you do want to have extended life studies. Yeah, it's not an easy endeavor. Yeah.
Well, we sell a lot of different products for that, and it really comes down to whether you are a artisan type shop or whether you're a manufacturer. On the artisan side, you can certainly make your own icings. A lot of times there's some consistency issues that people have with that. And so we at Dawn make some very good flat icings and glaze that we've taken the time to, we have special procedure for our sugars, how it's ground so that it's very fine. And we have different grades of icing for different projects. So I would really suggest that you reach out to us and we could find out what your specific needs are, and we could help you with that. We also sell some glaze and icing sugars, and you can do some various things with those to make your own icing in a commercial type environment. And we'll be more than happy to help with those things as well, and to help you control that. But in an artisan shop, our pre-made flat icings and our pre-made glazes will perform the same day in and day out. You'll be able to heat them and use them very easily, and they will in most cases provide better shelf life for your donut, less weeping, and you'll have a more attractive donut. And the eye appeal alone will generally make up for the difference in the price of the pre-made icing or glaze versus one you would make for yourself.
I would also like to add that the glazes are really important. And Dr. Jayne can talk a little bit more about the food safety aspect of things. But, on a larger scale production of your own glazes, you need to make sure you have a sanitation SOP in place. You need to make sure that nobody touches the glaze with their bare hands. And you need to make sure that you package the cake donuts, especially immediately. So a lot of these issues I find really troubling when you use self-made glazes is you don't have preservatives in there. It's not that I don't encourage use of preservatives or not, but because you are lacking the preservatives in there, and it keeps food safety issues open in glazes that you self-make, because glazes are really high in water activity. And because of that, you don't know where your employees' hands has gone. You don't know where that sugar has been stored. You don't know a lot of these things that could potentially create a hazard on your benchtop when you use this self-made glazes. Dr. Jayne, do you have any thoughts on that?
You pretty much covered the critical factors. Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to add to that.
Do you think they should cook the glaze or anything to add a food safety aspect to it?
Yeah, that's a good point, Lynn. I know that in one of the food safety classes that I took a few years back, they were citing the glazed donuts. The glaze was actually a case of carrying salmonella food poisoning, and it was simply of what you stated. It was contamination from hands, glazed, because we think about the donuts being a baked product or a fried product, the internal temperature not supporting bacterial growth, but that glaze sets at room temperature and can multiply those 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 things that are in it. And so it really is a good point that most people would overlook, because a lot of times glaze sets in a retail environment 2, 3, 4, 5 days in a bucket, in a hopper, and it's just there at room temperature, and it can be a significant source of bacterial growth.
That's it. And I just wanted to point it out because I've seen a lot of bakeries do that. And they forget about the glaze sitting on the tabletop. And, you know, a baker on Monday mix it up, and the baker on Thursday thinks it's fresh, you know, and that's where all the food poisoning issues come through. So if you have a good standard operating procedure, meaning that you have HACCP, you have critical control points, you either put some preservatives in there, or you make sure that you date it properly, and the people who make the glaze dates it properly. I don't think glazes are difficult to make, but the reasons why any bakery should buy ready-made glaze is because of this food safety issue. And I've always pushed for it because you will never know when a potential food poisoning might happen because somebody forgot to wear gloves to glaze, you know. So that's just my caution out there for all of you who are trying to seek extended shelf life for your product. There is so many issues when it comes down to extended shelf life. And I feel like it's not something that you can just decide to do the next day. You don't wake up and decide that your 3-day-old cake donut is going to last 30 days. But I would like to give Randy, Melissa, and Dr. Jayne, you know, an extra minute to wrap this up. And what are your thoughts in terms of shelf life extension for donuts?
Well, what we've seen a lot from the artisan retail donut shop side is really extended shelf life, being able to get maybe another 8 to 12 hours to move the production from maybe being a straight overnight to being able to be an afternoon, to facilitate employees. Employees are such a tough issue today that we're finding a lot of our extended shelf life is really 8 to 12, 18-hour extended shelf life to help smooth out the production kinks. And that's where I've worked with a lot of customers to focus on that. Our cake donuts will last longer, but our biggest market of working with people ESL right now is just to help with the labor shortage.
Yeah, I guess if I can build on that, I certainly don't have a doctorate, but I teach food safety. So I'm right there with you. I was just kind of being quiet. You know, here's the thing, like controlling pathogens is the biggest part of extended shelf life, right? So if we're looking for an off-the-shelf solution for somebody that, you know, is in the artisan channel, then, you know, Dawn has a full range of pre-done mixes for you, right? But the key that both the doctors were talking about is what are you doing with that packaging and what happens, right, along the path to that packaging. And if you don't have a HACCP plan in place where you're controlling each of those critical control points, you need to get one. And there's some really great folks out there that can help you through that process. If you're right at the beginning, you know, you could certainly start by getting your sanitation certificate, whether that's a ServSafe or one of the other ones. Make sure you go through that process. So you start at the beginning and then kind of work your way through. You know, Dawn also offers a full line of dough conditioners, various other items that can help really extend the shelf life on almost anything. But I just really want to pause and focus on packaging and making sure that anytime you're doing that, you pull in somebody that is ready for that, right? As soon as we start doing modified air packaging, we have to stop and make sure that you're doing it the right way. So I think we've got some great solutions for you, but I would really encourage you, if you have questions about these things, to start with sanitation and then move your way forward.
And I guess I would just add to that by saying, if you are looking at extending shelf life for weeks and months, really don't be scared of preservative systems. Keep in mind that baking is not a kill step. I know everyone gets into that thought of, well, I'm baking it, ergo I'm killing everything in it. You're not. Whether you're frying it or actually putting it in an oven, that is not a certified kill step. So think about preservative systems for bacterial contamination, but also think about preservative systems from a mold inhibition standpoint as well, because nothing is a kill step in baking.
Well, thank you, everyone. You have such great insights into making donuts and making it last for shelf life. And I hope everyone, all the attendees here, take that thought away on producing, food safe donuts that can last a longer time on the shelf. Okay. But, let's start by looking at this from an artisan point of view and making your donuts, customized to the taste of your region and your community. So thank you everyone for coming today. I really appreciate all the input. And if you need anything else, go to BAKERpedia.com. And also we place donfoods.com URL on the chat, and you can check out all their products below. Thanks for coming, everyone.